Hi, I'm Dongxiang. Welcome to Digging into China, where we explore China in depth to reveal unique perspectives. For years, numerous overseas dissidents have labeled all CCP policies over the past decade as failures, pointing to incomplete initiatives and unfulfilled political objectives. They mockingly call Xi Jinping the emperor of unfinished projects, implying that every endeavor by the CCP ends in failure with no plan ever achieving its intended outcome. Since 2014, China's economy has undeniably worsened. The real estate bubble has burst. The debt crisis is intensifying. Foreign capital is fleeing at an unprecedented rate. Unemployment is soaring, and the younger generations are increasingly rejecting marriage and parenthood. From a purely economic perspective, the CCP appears to falter at every turn. Xi Jinping's series of impulsive and poorly conceived economic stimulus measures have consistently proven to be wasteful and ineffective. However, economic development is merely one of many responsibilities of a regime. Between 2001 and 2014, the CCP prioritized economic growth as its core mission, channeling its majority of its manpower, resources, and finances into this endeavor. After 2014, however, the regime shifted its focus away from economic development, and by 2017, GDP metrics were no longer used to evaluate or promote officials at various levels. The 19th Party Congress outlined a new guiding principle of the party: stay true to the original aspiration and keep the mission firmly in mind. This original aspiration and mission refer to upholding the four cardinal principles, safeguarding the regime's stability and ensuring its continuity. The four cardinal principles, familiar to most Chinese people, were formally introduced by Deng Xiaoping and incorporated into the party constitution in 1992. They state: adhering to the socialist path, upholding the people's democratic dictatorship, maintaining the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, and adhering to Marxism, Leninism, and the Mao Zedong thought. These four cardinal principles are the foundation of our nation. The phrase "foundation of our nation" reveals the CCP's true priority and mission. Economic development, on the other hand, is merely a tool to sustain regime stability. When economic growth comes into conflict with regime stability, the CCP will unhesitantly sacrifice economic growth to focus on maintaining control. There should be no illusions about this. Industrial civilization and totalitarian regimes are fundamentally incompatible in the long run. Industrial civilization is rooted in equality, freedom, and fair market practice, achieving optimal resource allocation through widespread market exchanges. Totalitarian regimes, by contrast, concentrate all power in the hands of one leader and channel benefits through a centralized authority, ensuring that the ruling elite control both power and resources. Young people raised in an era of industrial civilization naturally resist authoritarianism and have an innate aversion to totalitarian rule. To preserve itself, a totalitarian regime will inevitably seek to suppress industrial civilization and push for deindustrialization. Russia is a prime example. In the context between the industrial civilization and the Soviet Union's totalitarian regime, industrial civilization claimed the victory, leading to the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991. However, ambitious figures have never been in short supply on Russian soil. After coming to power in 2000, Vladimir Putin spent 2 decades successfully implementing deindustrialization, consolidating a new authoritarian order in the process. At present, Putin holds absolute power in Russia, but the price has been steep. The country has lost its capacity for industrial and economic production. Russia can no longer produce bicycles, clothing zippers, or buttons. Returning to the initial question, there is no doubt that all of the CCP's economic policies over the past decade have failed. However, this failure was entirely intentional, an effort to deliberately stagnate the economy. Let me emphasize again, economic management is only one aspect of governance. In other areas, the CCP's policies have achieved complete success. Below, I will elaborate on these accomplishments. The first major success of the CCP is its significant transformation of the political decision-making framework. Over the past decade, the central decision-making system has been thoroughly restructured, moving towards governance through central committees. These include the Central Leading Group for Comprehensive Deepening Reform, the Central Financial and Economic Affairs Leading Group, the Central Leading Group for Party Building, the Central Leading Group on Ecological and Environmental Protection, the Central Leading Group for Education, and the Central Leading Group for Inspections, among others. These committees have completely taken over the responsibilities of their respective administrative departments, assuming authority over policy approvals, personal appointments, and performance evaluations. Consequently, the State Council has been effectively sidelined, excluded from the decision-making process, and reduced to a rubber stamp with no substantive role. This dramatic shift in the decision-making mechanism merits closer analysis. Take the Central Financial and Economic Affairs Leading Group as an example. Initially established in the 1950s, it functioned as an advisory body. While its members could make recommendations on economic policy, they lacked direct control over administrative departments and could not issue binding directives. As a result, the group was a purely consultative body with no actual power. During the reform and opening up era, the CCP's top-level political decision-making framework gradually took shape. The party secretary handled the political affairs while the premier managed economic matters, creating a system of check and balances. Together with other Politburo members, they formed a distinctive collective decision-making structure. A key aspect of this system was the division of responsibilities between the party secretary and the premier, with each counterbalancing the other. This balance was most evident during the Jiang Zemin and Zhu Rongji's tenure. Their roles were clearly defined. Jiang, though nominally the head of the Central Financial and Economic Affairs Leading Group, largely refrained from intervening in economic matters. Zhu Rongji, on the other hand, held near total authority over economic decisions. Major initiatives such as the tax-sharing reform, state-owned enterprise restructuring, and the WTO accession negotiations were all spearheaded by Zhu Rongji. Meanwhile, Jiang Zemin focused on political affairs, including the development of the three represents theory, which broadened the scope of party membership. Under this theory, private entrepreneurs and professionals could join the party as they were seen as representing the development directing of advanced productive forces. During the Hu Wen period, the roles of the party secretary and the premier were clearly defined, and both largely stayed out of each other's domains. If there were any criticism, it could center on Hu Jintao's policy of non-interference, which meant no changes to political system and no political reforms. Instead, Premier Wen Jiabao was allowed to pursue limited economic reforms, such as market-oriented changes in state-owned enterprises and introducing a competitive mechanism for survival of the fittest. By 2010, of the 45 major commitments China made when joining the WTO, only 23 had been fully implemented. The remaining 22, including promises of equal market access and telecom industry reforms, were not pursued. In March 2010, Google announced its withdrawal from China in protest of tightening content censorship, highlighting the resistance to political reforms within the system. In 2013, with Xi Jinping taking office, the political landscape shifted dramatically. Supported by the CCP Red family elite, Xi swiftly outmaneuvered Premier Li Keqiang, backed by the Youth League faction. The balance of power that had existed between the party secretary and the premier quickly shifted to Xi, leading to the establishment of a single dominant figure in leadership, with the so-called decision by one person. Without the checks and balances between the party secretary and the premier, the Politburo Standing Committee lost its ability to provide a counterbalance. As a result, collective decision-making was sidelined, and Xi Jinping became the sole authority on all major decisions. In this context, the Central Financial and Economic Affairs Leading Group ceased to be a mere advisory body and quickly gained real power. After 2015, departments responsible for economic matters such as National Development and Reform Commission, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, and the Ministry of Commerce and the People's Bank of China were required to report to this group and undergo performance evaluations with the power of veto. This meant that by 2015, the Central Financial and Economic Affairs Leading Group could unilaterally decide if a minister was competent or should remain in office, effectively stripping the State Council of its authority in economic decision-making and evaluation. All such powers were now centralized under Xi Jinping, the head of the financial group. To manage these responsibilities, each economic sector needed a dedicated liaison, which led to an expansion of the group staff. The organization became more formalized and its processes were clearly defined. In March 2018, the group was renamed the Central Financial and Economic Affairs Committee, establishing a comprehensive management structure with structured reporting processes. It formally took over the State Council's economic management functions, rendering the State Council a purely advisory body and reducing the premier to a ceremonial figure. Xi Jinping's most significant achievement was the establishment of working group governance, which completely dismantled the collective decision-making framework that had evolved since the reform and opening period. Through this, he concentrated power into a single individual, realizing the idea of power in one benefits through one. After 2018, China truly became a totalitarian state. For the CCP elite, this transformation was a remarkable success. Every move was methodically planned and executed flawlessly, leaving the other political factions stunned and helpless. Once dominant factions such as the Youth League faction, the Shanxi faction, the Anhui faction, the Tianjin clique, and the Shanghai gang were gradually crushed. Their allies were imprisoned, their business dismantled, and ultimately they had no choice but to relinquish power, suffering a total defeat. Regarding the concentration of power, there was no unfinished business at the top. On the contrary, it was a resounding success, unprecedented in its scale. Even Mao Zedong, for all his strength, never succeeded in sidelining Zhou Enlai and the State Council. But the current CCP elite managed to do just that. Xi Jinping's second major accomplishment was the creation of a deeply entrenched system of control. The CCP enhanced the existing neighborhood and village committees, formalizing these grassroots governance organizations and integrating them into the official power structure. Take the neighborhood committee, for example. The traditional neighborhood committee have now evolved into community management committees, which have set up an organized grid system. Urban areas are divided into grids, with appointed grid workers overseeing and managing them to ensure that every individual's life, including birth, aging, sickness, and death, is monitored. The key word here is management. It's about control, not service. The community grid management system is designed to monitor whether individuals belong to any categories defined by the CCP as dangerous. If you happen to fit these categories, expect your daily life to be tightly controlled by grid workers. You will be required to report activities such as shopping in advance. And if you don't, grid workers will visit your home to conduct face-to-face inspections. Refusing this inspection could result in being labeled as mentally ill and forcibly sent to a psychiatric hospital by the community committee. So, before you refuse an inspection, make sure you know how to convince a doctor that you are not mentally ill. The level of control that the CCP exerts over the grassroots today is unprecedented in Chinese history. In the past, all major uprisings were driven by a breakdown in grassroots control, where power could no longer penetrate to the most basic levels of society. The CCP, however, has learned from these past failures. During the 3 years of COVID-19 lockdowns, it implemented an extraordinary tight grassroots control system, the grid worker system. As of now, the number of grid workers has surpassed 4 million, greatly enhancing the CCP's oversight and control at the grassroots level, ensuring that no aspect of the population escapes surveillance. For example, whenever a group of more than 10 people gathers, whether for a game of mahjong or a drinking session, the grid workers are immediately notified and report to higher authorities. If a grid worker fails to receive this information within an hour, their monthly performance evaluation is marked as unsatisfactory, and they lose their entire performance bonus. One can only imagine how intensively this grid worker will monitor your every movement next month. In short, the CCP has now achieved an extraordinary feat. It has concentrated power at the top while simultaneously implementing a comprehensive grassroots grid system that effectively monitors every individual. In Chinese history, centralized power at the top was traditionally accompanied by a relaxation of control at the grassroots level. This contradiction has always existed in the system. Even the most authoritarian emperors of the past could not maintain both centralized control and strict grassroots oversight. However, the CCP has accomplished both, marking a historical achievement that could change the way political science and public administration are taught. If there were a Nobel Prize for political control, Xi Jinping would certainly win it, and as long as he remains in power, he could continue to win it indefinitely, with no one else being able to compete. Most people find it difficult to understand just how challenging it is to simultaneously centralize power at the top and maintain strict control over the grassroots. If we look at history, we see that the most authoritarian emperors often had the weakest control over the grassroots. The impoverished masses, linked together and unregulated, would eventually rise up in rebellion when their connections reached a critical mass. The issue of how to maintain tight control over the grassroots while consolidating power at the top has long been a fundamental challenge in public administration, one that even leaders like Hitler struggled to address. His solution was to create a balance through the manufacture of internal and external enemies, such as the genocide of Jews and declaring war on the West, in a desperate attempt to stabilize this power dynamic. At this point, in the relatively peaceful environment, the Chinese government has managed to resolve the challenge of balancing top-level centralization with grassroots control. It has effectively subdued the population, preventing any significant unrest, regardless of soaring unemployment or growing discontent among the lower classes. Nothing causes any substantial disturbance. While isolated incidents may still occur, such as the tragic death of a child in Puxian County, Shanxi Province on January 7th, locals briefly protested. The government's response was swift and efficient, following standard procedures to handle such situations. The measures included immediate intervention from military and police forces, imposing a citywide lockdown, while internet and communication channels were fully shut down. The grassroots grid management system was quickly activated, thoroughly investigating all involved individuals and categorizing the responses, some arrested, others placed under surveillance. This well-coordinated response proved extremely effective, and within just 2 days, 2 days, the issue was resolved without any social consequences. This incident highlights the Chinese government's unparalleled reach and control. Given China's vast size, local conflicts between citizens and officials are frequent. In the past, resolving these issues would take weeks and often become widely known. Now, however, such events are completely suppressed within 48 hours without any public ripple. This demonstrates the unprecedented level of control the government has achieved over both top-level power and grassroots management, marking an unprecedented peak in Chinese history. The Chinese government employs a variety of methods in public administration. Here are 3 notable strategies. First, the systemic suppression of regional dialects in the economically advanced eastern areas. From Cantonese to Shanghainese, these dialects are increasingly at risk of extinction, with the younger generation largely unable to speak them. The aim behind this is clear. Eliminating cultural diversity strengthens national unity and compliance. True control is achieved when every citizen conforms to a uniform standard. Second, the implementation of a deeply ingrained education system promoting hatred and subjugation. This includes instilling animosity towards private enterprise, foreign powers such as Japan, the US, and European nations, and ideologies of equality and freedom. It cultivates disdain for life and nature, while simultaneously encouraging subordination to authority. This method is highly effective. Today's youth have largely become a generation devoid of independent thought or personality, and this state is unlikely to change. Third, the creation of a comprehensive information blockade that reaches every individual, regardless of your status, influence, or whether you use public platforms, private chats, or group messages. Everything you say is meticulously monitored. This surveillance comes from a multitude of departments, agencies, and entities, to the extent that listing all of them would be impossible. Absolute control over information leads to unlimited escalation of surveillance intensity. This represents a historical achievement that no other autocratic regime, past or present, has been able to achieve. Under this unparalleled level of control, it becomes nearly impossible for the average citizen to resist. Through pressure tactics, surveillance, and media control, the regime has reduced the possibility of dissent to a minimum. Any attempt to organize or express dissatisfaction is fraught with tremendous risk. However, I remain convinced that if the Chinese Communist Party were to collapse, it would likely be due to internal defection. History shows that the strongest fortresses are often breached from within. When internal conflicts intensify, factions break apart, or power struggles become uncontrollable, these will be the factors that ultimately cause the regime's downfall. I believe this day is not far off. It is bound to come. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, if you find this video helpful, please like it, drop a comment below, and hit the subscribe button right here. It really helps YouTube suggest my video to others. I'll be back with more content soon. Until then, be well.